everyone, it's System Coral here, and today I'm going to be talking about a bit of a really triggering and controversial topic. Today I'm going to be talking about trauma and sex. Sex, kink, trauma, intrusive thoughts, the whole shebang. So it's going to be touching on some tough topics like CSA, pedophilia, incest, stuff like that, traumatic things. And also it's going to be talking about sex, BDSM, kink, sexual things like that. So if that is something that is triggering for you or something you cannot handle right now, I would highly suggest clicking off the video right now because we're really going to have an honest discussion about it, and I am citing my sources at the end of the video because I spent about 2 weeks researching a lot about this topic so I can make sure you guys have the best information you can get. So with that in mind, I am going to start. So with some of these, I'm going to be using quotes. The first thing I want to dive in on is people's sexual responsiveness is embedded in an emotional context. Thoughts and feelings about themselves and relationships will determine their sexual ability at any given time, which is a direct quote from the source. So what does that mean? It means that a big part of sex is emotions and your psychological well-being. If something is inhibiting your psychological well-being and your emotions during sex, it can put a very big wall in how that affects you physically and mentally. It can cause sex to be extremely painful, distressing, and it can also cause physical issues, which I will touch in a second. It can cause a lot of gynecologic problems, I apologize, such as chronic pelvic pain, dyspareunia, vaginismus, non-specific vaginitis, gastrointestinal disorders, a lower pain threshold, and many more issues can arise from it. Lachie Motley, a trauma specialist, says folks may find themselves increasing sexual activity. Some may have a deep aversion to sex, but most will find themselves somewhere in between that. She describes sex after trauma as being on a spectrum of how that sex can affect your sexual behavior, from hypersexuality to complete aversion to sex. And she's describing that most people you'll find right in the center of that, being they can be hypersexual, they can be averse, depends. She also describes how it's very critical for survivors to develop a good definition of consent and boundaries. It's very important for survivors because their trust levels can be skewed after that, and their sense of sexuality. It's important for them to have an established consent and boundaries to make sure that when they do perform in sexual activities, they feel completely safe and in control. It's good to have very open communication, and it's also very beneficial to have regular check-ins during sex. And that can look like, hey, are you still enjoying this? Is there something that I can do to help you? Are you okay? Just regular check-ins to make sure they're still okay and still enthusiastically consenting to what's going on. Next, we're going to be talking about kinks and how, not that trauma necessarily can cause kinks, because studies have found that trauma can't cause kinks, but trauma can have an effect on kinks, and kinks can be beneficial to the healing of trauma in a lot of people. And also, people who have been through trauma might go to kinks in a more unhealthy way. It depends, and we'll be touching on that. So first we need to talk about what is a kink. Now, a lot of people get kink and fetish confused. A fetish is described in the definition as an abnormal obsession or abnormal fascination with a certain object that causes sexual gratification. Object or scenario that causes extreme sexual gratification. Usually with fetishes, they cannot have the sexual gratification without said thing, which is different from a kink. With a kink, it's a bizarre or unconventional sexual preference or behavior. Now, it's considered bizarre or unconventional because society views it that way. Not that it actually is, it's just not the norm that society set. And it says sexual preference or just plain behavior because it's also important to establish kinks can be unsexual or sexual. You can use kink in a sexual context, but not all kinks are sexual. A lot of kinks can be used therapeutically and can be completely not sexual and be more of a role play scenario. But it would still be considered under the kink umbrella. Kink and trauma, especially sexual trauma, is a very controversial topic. A lot of people believe that it shouldn't happen and that survivors shouldn't be anywhere near it. And a lot of people are on the other side where they think it can be very beneficial and therapeutic. And honestly, there are many therapists who recommend that if it's something that helps you work through it, go for it. A lot of the reason also that it is controversial, because in the past, when there weren't a lot of studies, when there weren't a lot of knowledge about sex and kinks, a lot of mental health professionals viewed it in a negative light. That's why when you look, a lot of sexual disorders that were listed in previous DSMs don't exist anymore because they realized they aren't actually disorders. Some disorders are disorders, such as pedophilic disorder and other types of disorders and specific fetishes, but the disorders are classified as fetish disorders. They aren't classified as kinks, and that's where a lot of controversy and confusion arises in this topic. Now, kinks and survivors can usually happen in two ways. Some survivors go to kinks, and it can cause a lot of re-traumatization and PTSD triggering, and it can develop into some people seeking it out in a almost self-harm way. And then on the other hand, a lot of people find therapeutic benefits from it, find that it gives them a sense of healing, and also, depending on the kink, helps them get a chance to fulfill what they were missing in life, such as age play. Age play is a kink that is non-sexual, and it is the role playing of someone playing a caregiving role and someone playing a child role. A lot of people participate in that kink in a therapeutic way because it gives them a chance to reconnect with their childhood and get the type of care and support for their inner child that they didn't receive. And that's why there's a big amount of survivors in that community, because it gives them a chance to receive the love and caring and that childlike. It's almost a way to repeat your childhood, to get the things that you didn't get when you were a child to get to experience that again in a healthy way. And it can really help heal your inner child. And then there are other kinks, which I will talk about in a minute, that gives a different type of approach. A good thing about kinks with people who do find it therapeutic, it gives them a chance to be in a safe space where they can control what happens. They are in total control. They have a safe word. They can stop at any time. And they can control the outcome, which helps survivors, because it can give them a chance to reclaim what happened. It can give them a chance to control what happened, because trauma can feel like you're out of control, and a lot of it times it can really affect that. So it can be very healing in that way, because you can be in control of what happens. You can control the outcome. You can reface your fears and overcome them. It can also give you a chance to experience new things that you've wanted to try in a safe, consensual way. And again, that the person has total control of what's going on. Aftercare is very important. Aftercare is the act of, after a scene, which a scene is the play that happens. After a scene, aftercare is sitting down and saying what you liked, what you didn't like, what you would try next time if you don't want to try it again. Also, aftercare includes doing stuff that each person likes to kind of, because it can bring up a lot of emotions, positive emotions, but also, even if it's therapeutic, it can bring up a lot of thoughts. And so aftercare also gives a chance to kind of come down from that, because any type of play or sex or anything, even in non-sexual contexts, the emotional aspect of it can really raise your adrenaline. And after your adrenaline is pumping, you experience an adrenaline drop. So aftercare helps you care for yourself after an adrenaline drop. So I already touched on the fact that kink isn't just sex. Some people do have sex during kink play, but a lot of people treat it more as role play or just play. Just two adults playing with certain objects or scenarios just to help or just for fun. Kink isn't just about sex, and a lot of the communities that people think are sexual are actually non-sexual at all. It's very rare in some kink communities, in some specific kink umbrellas, to find sex in them. So it really depends. The next thing I want to talk about is OCD and intrusive thoughts, which intrusive thoughts can happen at any time, but I specifically used the source from an OCD foundation because it touches a lot on intrusive thoughts. But intrusive thoughts can happen from PTSD, anxiety, many different causes. People with OCD might have sexual obsessions. Anyone with intrusive thoughts. People with intrusive thoughts might develop sexual obsessions. And there are links between people who have trauma and they might develop OCD. I, for example, developed OCD after my trauma. There is a genetic link, but there's also an environmental link to OCD. And it can appear in many ways. Some might have a rape obsession, and what that looks like is their intrusive thoughts and their obsessions revolve around a fear of not wanting to hurt someone unconsensually. Their intrusive thoughts might have to do with rape, but intrusive thoughts are thoughts that you get that you would never act on that are subconsciously rooted in some sort of fear or emotional response. So when you get intrusive thoughts, it might appear that to someone else that they might want to act on them. But in reality, intrusive thoughts are something that the person themselves would never want to do and are outside their character. So someone that might have intrusive thoughts about rape might avoid people, might be afraid of brushing up against them because, oh my gosh, I touched them without consent. They might be afraid of what would happen if I ever did this. I'm a bad person for thinking this. Another type of obsession is pedophilic obsessions. Their intrusive thoughts might revolve around what other people might view to be pedophilia, but in reality, again, it's intrusive thoughts. It's thoughts that they never act on, and that brings them great shame for even having, because it's something they'd never do, and it's something they don't want, and it's something that isn't them. People with pedophilic obsessions aren't pedophiles. They're someone who have an extreme fear of pedophiles themselves and ever becoming and associating with them. And what that might look like is not only the intrusive thoughts being about that, but it also might appear as them having an aversion to kids, avoiding them at all costs. And the main difference between that is pedophiles actively seek situations where they can be alone with kids, be close to kids. But people with OCD, pedophilic OCD, actively avoid kids. They actively avoid kids. They actively avoid looking, touching. They're extremely averse and concerned and worried about being near children or alone with children or have to watch and babysit children. Another type of OCD might be ancestral OCD. And with that, it can appear as avoiding family members, being terrified of being alone with family members, sometimes being scared of certain family members because what if they ever got attracted to them? Maybe they think that their sister looks pretty one day in a dress, and immediately they think, oh my gosh, it means that I'm a bad person, that I have these thoughts, when in reality they don't. It's a fear. Sorry, my knee was hurting. And a lot of people who have these thoughts, being it from OCD, PTSD, different factors, it brings a lot of shame, it brings a lot of guilt, and it brings a lot of anxiety and fear, terror even, because they are so afraid and shameful of these thoughts because it's not them. They aren't these things. They aren't what their brain is telling them, but their brain is still telling them these. And if anyone experienced these, you are not your intrusive thoughts. Your intrusive thoughts don't make you a bad person. Your intrusive thoughts don't make you the thing you're afraid you are. It's not something that's bad, it's something your brain is doing. And there's ways to work through them. The next thing I want to touch on is consent, because I feel like for this video it's important to talk about consent. Consent is something that is freely, enthusiastically given. Freely mean it's given without being coerced. Coerced means repeatedly asking or guilting someone into it. They just freely say, yes, I'd enjoy doing it. Enthusiastically means that they are positive about doing it. It's not saying, fine, I guess. It's not doing out of fear. It's them wanting and looking forward to this experience. Consent cannot be given if the person is underage, intoxicated, be it by alcohol or any type of drug, asleep or unconscious for any reason, under pressure. If you pressure someone into sex or the person feels pressured into doing it, that is not consent. Threatened. If you threaten someone or the person themselves feels threatened, that is also not consent. And unequal power dynamics, which means teacher to student, employer to employee, anything that has a very unequal power dynamic, consent cannot be given. The resources that I used for this video is the aftertrauma.org, acog.org, caase.org, beyondsafewords.com, gstherapycenter.com, thechildmind.org, which is the OCD site, and RAIN.org, which is a fantastic association for survivors of rape and sexual assault of any kind. And if you need resources or help after a sexual assault, be it happened yesterday or years ago, you can call them and they will help you, hook you up with resources. They are an amazing foundation. I highly recommend looking into them if you need some supports or if you need more information about sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, etc. To anyone who stayed to finish the video, I appreciate that, and I hope that this video gave you some insight in any way, shape, or form. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. This has been System Coral. See you guys later.